Yo guys, thanks for tuning in. My name is Eternize, and today's video is going to be all about mastering. So mastering is the absolute final step before the final export, and it's supposed to really fine-tune and polish the mix to make it well presentable in any listening situation. In today's music, and especially in hardstyle, that means loud, crisp and punchy. So today I will show you my go-to mastering chain that I've been using to master my own tracks and my clients' tracks for the past couple of years, and explain why I include and exclude certain plugins. Let's jump into it. Oh, and if you're interested in the leads in this video, they can all be found in my preset pack. Some of them are even free, so go check them out. Link in the description. Okay, so the track that we're going to be mastering today is Our Will, that was released a couple of weeks back. So let's have a listen to the pre-master without any effects engaged. Alright, so to start things off we have BX Control, and the sole purpose of this plugin is to remove low-end frequencies from the sides. Low-end frequencies, especially from the sides, tend to be a big limiting factor when it comes to reaching certain loudness levels. And for the most part we can't even hear side information below like 60 or 80 Hz anyway. As you can see in this track, I've been pretty liberal with the cutoffs sitting above 200 Hz, which is about as high as you would go on a master, I would say. But the reason is that the slope is so broad that 200 Hz almost isn't affected, and it only really starts to dip below 150. Also, the reason for this exact plugin is that Brainworks pride themselves in having filters that doesn't mess with the phase of the audio, so you can safely use it on a master. Let's take a listen to the before and after. Plugin number 2 is a Subtractive EQ. First note that is very important is that it is set to linear phase. If you don't have a plugin like the FabFilter EQ that has different modes, you'll have to use a dedicated linear phase EQ, otherwise you'll find that the EQ will alter the phase relations in your track, and that can drastically ruin your mix. Next thing, in extension of the first plugin, we continue to remove unnecessary frequencies. You can see that I've used both high cut and low cut to remove frequencies that we essentially cannot hear. If we zoom in on the low end, I have cut everything below 20 Hz, but really you can go as high as 35 Hz. And for most tracks you still can't hear the difference. I usually go with a 96 dB slope, because with the brick wall option I find that I have too many artifacts too often. So go with a 96 just to be safe. The next point is a bit higher on the scale and only affects the side information. And it might be a bit weird to see this right after a plugin that was set to cut below 200 Hz, right? But if you look closely, there's actually still some low-end information bouncing around even after the first plugin. So just to make sure that we have absolutely nothing left crossing 80 Hz, I cut it away with an EQ. So the idea is to strip away as much as possible before the limiter to be able to drive it as much as possible without distorting. And it's especially important with the low end, because the low end is always the thing that triggers the limiter first. The high cut is self-explanatory, and so is this little high boost. I thought the track needed a little lift in this area, right? But another important thing I want to say is that the EQ in the master chain is not meant to make big and drastic changes to the mix. The perfect scenario really is that you only have to high cut and low cut to create space for the limiter, and that you otherwise leave the EQ line completely flat, because that means that the mix is already perfectly balanced and tuned for loudness. The fact is that if you have to boost or cut a lot in the mastering stage, you're dealing with a bad mix, and it would 100% of the time be better to just jump back in the mix and make the necessary adjustments. The thing is, when you make these adjustments on the master, it affects the whole mix all of the time throughout the track. And I guarantee you that you will also affect elements that didn't need that particular boost or cut or whatever you do on the master. So keep it minimal, or better yet, don't make these adjustments on the master at all. Let's have a listen to the before and after. Okay, so next plugin in the chain, it would be time for a compressor, right? But I want to be very clear when saying that I think you should really be considering when to use a compressor and when not to, and also which compressor you use. For the most part, I don't think a regular compressor should be part of the mastering chain when we're talking about mastering hardstyle. With a lot of other music genres, it's different. They need compression because the nature of acoustic music, for example, is that it is very dynamic. So they need compression to reduce the dynamics and to get this glue effect over the mix. Now in hardstyle it's not like that. All the sounds that we use are already super compressed, and for glue we have reverb and delay and all kinds of effects to fill in the gaps. Also we use sounds such as the hardstyle kick drum that triggers the compressor way too much. I mean, we could compensate for this by using the sidechain feature and make it only react to the higher frequencies, but I still think it's very situational at best if you want to use a regular compressor. Having said that though, a multiband compressor like the one from FabFilter is not a bad choice for the master at all, and I've actually been reaching for it a couple of times lately. It is particularly good at gluing the track together and reducing the dynamics in a very transparent way. What I like to do is to use all of the bands except for the low end and space them out evenly over the frequency spectrum. Then I adjust the threshold so that it starts to react to the music, and I'll make sure that it's the same setting across all of the bands. Now this way the low end is not affected and the upper bands are not reacting to the low end. But more importantly, now each band are compressing depending on the incoming energy within each band. That means that the compressor is now constantly working to even out or flatten out the frequency response. And exactly that, a flat frequency response, is super important when we want to make things as loud as possible. The limiter is going to react first to any peaking frequencies, so if we feed it with a very flat frequency response, it will take longer for it to distort. Let's have a listen to the before and after. Okay, so this is the time where you would usually see people throw in some saturation. Either a saturation plugin, an exciter plugin, or a tape machine plugin. It all falls under the same category of adding harmonics. And when dealing with hardstyle and mastering, this is where I would tell you not to use it. Again, this is a case where dealing with acoustic music and dealing with a particularly aggressive type of electronic music are two very different things. Sure, when mastering acoustic music, you don't always have an acoustic bass or a set of drums playing the entire time. And then some tape saturation can come in handy and warm up the parts where it is lacking. But when we make hardstyle, the entire frequency spectrum is basically saturated the entire time. So if you find yourself in need of adding harmonics to the entire mix, chances are you need to jump back into the mix and find out what's lacking instead. The last plugin in the chain is the limiter. So the limiter's job is to catch and process the audio peaks and make sure nothing crosses 0 dB. And the way that limiters processes audio inputs are very different. So I usually have 4 different limiters that I cycle between, and then I choose the one that sound the best with the specific project that I'm mastering. The 4 different limiters I cycle between are the FabFilter Pro L2, the Invisible limiter, Isotope Ozone, and then I have the Oxford Inflator. And this is my experience with the different options. FabFilter is always very smooth. I can always make the material sound good with Pro L2. It's a very safe option and therefore it's also not as loud as the others. Invisible limiter sounds very much like Pro L2, but it has a tendency to also saturate the signal before limiting, which sounds good on some material and bad on others. Ozone has always been known to be able to go very loud, which is definitely the case with the setting on clipping or on the modern setting. At the same time, it is very digital sounding, but overall it's a solid and very transparent limiter in my opinion. The last option, Oxford Inflator, which is not actually a limiter, it more or less just acts like the ceiling that you'll find in limiters, but without the fancy processing before it. This is the option if you want to go the loudest. Simply slap this one in the end of the chain and mix into it. Let's take a listen to the before and after. and it is actually the inflator that I end up with 99% of the time. Now I will say that the reason I probably end up with the inflator is that I master within the project. I've said this so many times before, it is such an advantage to be mastering within the project. You don't have to compromise anything, you don't have to settle with settings on the limiter that is not as loud because something in the mix is triggering it. You can simply jump back into the mix and fix it instantly. The actual limiters are much more forgiving with all the processing, so for many people it produces better results. And though an inflator or clipper in the end is louder and punchier, it is very small gains that you get with this approach. I would always recommend trying different limiters to find the best option. And there it is, my current go-to mastering chain and the thoughts that go behind it. In this case it does look simple, but it is also because I've done the majority of the work in the mix. So don't forget, you're not supposed to correct mixing mistakes in mastering, and you really cannot fix a bad mix. I want to let you know that I do mix and mastering for clients, so if you have a mix that you need mastered, you can contact me on my socials. Also, don't forget to check out my preset packs, so you can make leads like the one you saw in this video. Some of them are even free. The link is in the description. Comment what you think and subscribe to the channel for future videos. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!